So for Chapter 16, we looked at sort of the writing requirements for contracts and sort of the statute of frauds, and the different contracts that are under that. So for the first section, it was to talk about whether we believe in the advice of always get it in writing. Personally, I believe you should always get it in writing. Not that oral contracts or verbal contracts aren't legitimate, which they totally are, but I personally believe that you should always get it in writing because it just helps protect you a little more. Because there are some people who are out there who would deny something, deny certain terms of the contract, whether they change their mind after the agreement was made, or they don't like how it's turning out or something like that. So they'll try to deny certain terms or the contract in general. That's one way you can get screwed over. But another thing too is that people can forget certain terms of the contract, which in turn they might think you're screwing them over because they forgot, which that's something that you definitely want to avoid. So those are like the two main reasons why I highly recommend always get it in writing, no matter what. That's what I always try to do anyways. So explain what the statute of frauds is and what it covers. So basically the statute of frauds is a statute that requires certain contracts to have something signed. It has to have physical evidence of something being signed, whether that be on paper or electronically, doesn't matter. But that's the main requirement for the statute of frauds. There are certain contracts that always must be in writing. The primary reason for this is to protect innocent parties. Sometimes, yes. Yes. Go away. Sorry, I'm not redoing it because I've redone it about 4 times from people walking. Anyways, it doesn't matter. It's to protect innocent parties, and when you require that written evidence, you can prevent that. It's all about making it fair and equal. So, for part 2, explain in detail under the statute of frauds what types of contracts must be in writing. So there are certain types of contracts that must be in writing, like I said before. So one of the big things is contracts involving interests of land. So anything like along the lines of like real estate or stuff like that always must be in writing. And when it comes to real estate, it always has to be full disclosure as well. But another type of contract is contracts that cannot be completed, or the terms cannot be completed within a year's time of the contract being agreed upon. So if it's going to take longer than a year, it must be in writing. And collateral or secondary contracts, those also must be in writing as well. Promises made in consideration of marriage, so this can include anything along the lines of prenuptial agreements. Those must always be in writing, but anything that involves consideration of marriage must be in writing. And commercial sales, contracts for the sales of goods priced at $500 or more, those also must be require some type of writing under the statute of frauds. And they do this for many reasons. For land and property and stuff like that, it must include all physical objects that are actually attached to the soil, different things like that. So there's a lot of different things that it covers, and it's there for a reason. So explain and describe any exceptions to these requirements. So there are exceptions when it comes to the statute of frauds. The first part is partial performance. So when a contract has been partially performed, a court may grant specific performance, an equitable remedy that requires performance of the contract according to its precise terms. So that's a big thing for an exception. Another exception would be admissions. If a party against whom enforced of an oral contract is sought admits under oath that the contract for sale was made, the contract will be enforceable. So like once you like admit or say that the contract for that was made, right from then on it is going to be enforceable. And promissory estoppel. Wow. If a person justifiably relies on another person's promise to his or her detriment, oh my god, a court may prevent the promisor from denying that the contract exists. So right there are 3 different types of exceptions when it comes to the statute of frauds and the writing requirements. So what does the statute of frauds consider to be adequate writing to fulfill the requirements? So for this, what constitutes as writing? You can have a invoice, sales slip, check, fax, email, or a combination of these. A written contract can consist of multiple documents that are like physically attached to each other, or within the same envelope or folder or whatnot. So that's basically those things are what is considered to be writing. What are the things that are required in the writing? Like a note or something that's like evidencing an oral contract only needs the essential terms of the contract, not every term. So you can have certain terms within a contract that are orally agreed upon. There also must be some indication that the parties voluntarily agreed to the terms. So you would need a thing saying within the writing saying that both parties agreed to all the terms that are within that contract. That is definitely something that's required. Other things like essential terms, quantities signed by a party to be charged, names of the parties, subject matter consideration, sales of the land if it's within real estate or stuff like that. Must state the price and description with sufficient clarity, so you gotta have a good description of it. So those basically are all the requirements and what is considered adequate when it comes to writing those contracts. So the last part, what is the parole evidence rule and why is it important in terms of the statute of frauds? So the parole evidence rule basically is a testimony or other evidence of communication between the parties that is not contained in the contract itself. So normally you cannot present other evidence if it contradicts or varies in terms of written contracts. So there are exceptions to this. However, contracts subsequently modified, voidable or void contracts, contracts containing ambiguous terms, incomplete contracts. So basically, this is allowing parties to present their evidence, other evidence besides the actual contract. So if they were to communicate in another sort of way, they are able, under the parole evidence rule, they are able to bring up those sorts of evidence, the different types of communication between the parties that wasn't actually within the contract. So that's only if the court finds that the written contract represents the complete and final statement of parties' agreement. If that's the case, like what I just said, neither party can present the parole evidence. Otherwise, the parole evidence can be presented. But yeah, so that's everything in Chapter 16.